Dr. Harold Voss grabbed Lena's wrist so hard she felt the bones grind together. He slammed her hand against the nurse's station counter, leaned in close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, and hissed through his teeth, "You touch one of my patients again without authorization, and I will end your career before it starts." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 23 staff members stood watching a senior physician threaten the rookie nurse who had just done the impossible, brought a man back from the dead with her bare hands. The man she saved had 20 bullet wounds, and the 2 FBI agents walking through the front door right now were not here for Voss. If this is your first time here, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment right now telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The night Lena Cross walked into Mercy General's emergency room for her very first overnight shift as a licensed nurse, she told herself one thing: keep your head down, do your job, don't stand out. She had said those exact words to herself in the mirror of her studio apartment while she buttoned her scrubs with steady hands. She had said them again in the elevator on the way up to the 3rd floor. She had whispered them under her breath when the charge nurse, a heavy-set woman named Donna Briggs, handed her a clipboard and gave her the kind of look that senior nurses reserve for rookies. The look that says, "Don't break anything and don't touch what you don't understand." "You've got beds 4, 7, and 12 tonight," Donna said, already turning away. "Nothing heavy. We've got 2 chest pains, 1 stitches, and a possible kidney stone. You'll be fine." "Thank you," Lena said. Donna glanced back over her shoulder. "Don't thank me yet." It was 11:47 in the evening when Lena settled into her first quiet hour. The ER was humming along the way ERs do at that time of night. Not loud, not silent, just alive with the low murmur of monitors and the distant creak of gurneys and the occasional sharp beep from a machine down the hall that nobody seemed to be rushing toward. She had just finished checking on the man in bed 12, a retired teacher named Mr. Gerald, who had eaten too much at his grandson's birthday party and was convinced he was dying of a heart attack, but was in fact suffering from spectacular indigestion. He had gripped her hand with both of his when she told him he was going to be fine. "You're sure?" he asked. "I'm sure, Mr. Gerald. My wife is going to say I told you so." "She probably will," Lena said, and she gave him a small, genuine smile. She was walking back toward the nurse's station when she heard it. Not the sound of an ambulance, because she had already heard 2 that evening, and neither had rattled her. This was different. This was the sound of a radio crackling from somewhere near the ambulance bay, and the voice on the other end was saying words in a tight, controlled cadence that made the back of Lena's neck go cold. "Multiple GSWs, 20 confirmed entry points. Patient is in full cardiac arrest. ETA 90 seconds. We need a trauma bay, we need a surgeon, and we need blood. Type O negative as much as you have." Donna Briggs was already moving. The charge nurse transformed in an instant from a tired woman at the end of a long shift into something precise and sharp and fully in command. "Trauma Bay 1, she called out. "Get Dr. Voss out of whatever he's doing. Get me 2 large-bore IVs. Get me the crash cart. Get me—" "I already put in a call to Voss," said one of the other nurses, a young man named Pete. "He's not answering." "Then find him," Donna snapped. The ambulance bay doors burst open. What came through them made the room flinch. 2 paramedics were running, and between them on a gurney was a man so large he barely fit the width of the mattress. He was dressed in the shredded remnants of civilian clothing, but the body beneath it was something else entirely, sculpted and hardened in a way that belonged to someone who had spent years being made into a weapon. His skin was a map of trauma. Bandages were pressed to his torso, his shoulder, his left thigh, and they were all soaked through. His face was still. His chest was not moving. "No pulse since the scene," the lead paramedic, a woman named Carly, announced as they transferred him to the trauma bay bed. We got him back once in the rig, lost him again at 3rd Avenue. He's been down 4 minutes. Donna was already at his side. CPR? We've been doing CPR. Then keep going. Donna turned, scanning the room. Where is Voss? I can't find him, Pete said, and the stress in his voice was audible. He's not in his office. He's not in the break room. His phone is going to voicemail. Get me the attending on backup. Get me anybody with a surgical license right now. Backup is 40 minutes out. There was a multi-car on the I-95. The room went quiet in a way that was somehow louder than any noise. 20 entry wounds, no pulse, no surgeon, a clock ticking. It was Lena who moved first. She stepped forward from the edge of the room where she had been standing and pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. Not in the way a new nurse moves, tentatively, looking for permission, but in the way someone moves when they already know exactly what they're looking for and exactly what they're going to do when they find it. He's in PEA, she said. Donna looked at her. Cross, you need to step back. He has a tension pneumothorax on the right side. His trachea is deviated left. If we don't decompress him right now, CPR isn't going to do anything. There was a beat of silence. The paramedic named Carly stopped mid-compression and looked up. One of the attending residents, a 3rd-year named Dr. Malik, turned from where he was trying to establish IV access. Everyone in that room was looking at the rookie nurse, who was standing at the head of a man who was technically dead, speaking in the calm, certain voice of someone who had stood in this exact moment before. Cross, Donna said, lower this time, almost a warning. I need a 14-gauge needle, 3.5 inches at minimum, 2nd intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Lena turned to the supply tray, found what she was looking for, turned back. Someone keep doing compressions. Dr. Malik, can you manage the airway? Dr. Malik blinked. He was 27 years old, and this was the most terrifying thing he had ever witnessed in his short career. But something in her voice, the complete absence of panic, made him nod and move to the head of the bed. What are you doing? Donna grabbed Lena's arm. You are a 1st-year nurse. You are not authorized. He's going to die in the next 90 seconds if nobody decompresses that lung, Lena said. Her voice did not rise. She looked directly at Donna with gray eyes that were utterly, disturbingly calm. Call it when someone with the right title shows up. Until then, I'm going to try to keep him alive. Donna let go of her arm, and Lena Cross, 1st-year nurse, 43 days into her career at Mercy General Hospital, performed a needle thoracostomy on a man with 20 bullet wounds and a deviated trachea in the middle of the night without a surgeon in the room, while an ER charge nurse stood 2 feet away and couldn't find one single reason to stop her. The sound of air rushing through the needle was unmistakable. The man's chest moved. Just a small shift, barely perceptible, but the paramedic named Carly felt it under her hands. Hold compressions, Lena said. Pete pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. 5 seconds. I've got a pulse, Pete said, and his voice cracked on the last word. It's weak. It's there. I've got a pulse. Nobody in that room made a sound. It was the kind of silence that lives on the other side of something impossible. Then Donna said very quietly, Get me Dr. Voss. They found Dr. Harold Voss. 20 minutes later, in the physician's lounge on the 2nd floor, asleep in a recliner with his phone on silent, he came into the trauma bay, still tucking in his shirt, took one look at the patient, took one look at Lena, and his face went through 3 different expressions in about 4 seconds. Who decompressed him? I did, Lena said from where she was hanging a 2nd bag of O-negative blood. You're a nurse. Yes. A 1st-year nurse. 43 days, she confirmed. Dr. Voss stared at her. Then he looked at Donna. Donna met his eyes and said nothing. He looked back at Lena. She was adjusting the IV line with both hands, her attention on her patient, utterly unconcerned with whatever expression was on his face. All right, Voss said finally, pulling on a pair of gloves. Everybody brief me, from the beginning. For the next 2 hours, Mercy General's trauma bay was a war zone of a different kind. Dr. Voss worked alongside a surgical team that had been scrambled from the backup roster, and Lena Cross stayed in that room. Nobody told her to leave. Technically, the trauma bay was not her assigned area. Technically, she should have gone back to beds 4, 7, and 12, and the gentleman with the indigestion. But nobody told her to leave, and she didn't go. And the reason nobody told her to leave was a thing that nobody in that room was willing to say out loud, which was this: she was the most useful person in that room. Not the most credentialed, not the most senior, but the most useful. She anticipated what Voss needed before he asked for it. She identified a secondary bleed in the left subclavian region that the second surgical resident had missed. She quietly corrected a dosing calculation on the vasopressor drip that would have put the patient into a dangerous arrhythmia. She did all of it without drama, without calling attention to herself, and with the specific, focused economy of movement that belongs to people who have done very hard things in very uncontrolled environments for a very long time. At 2:47 in the morning, Dr. Voss stepped back from the table and stripped his gloves. "He's stable," he said. "Get him to the ICU." He looked around the room. "Good work." His eyes landed on Lena for just a moment. Something moved across his face. He didn't say anything else. Lena cleaned up her station, disposed of her gloves, and walked back to bed 4 to check on her chest pain patient. She didn't tell anyone her hands were shaking. Just slightly. Just enough. The next morning, the hospital was not quiet. The thing about saving a man with 20 bullet wounds in the middle of the night is that it does not stay a secret. Hospitals do not have secrets. They have shift changes, and shift changes have conversations. And by 6 in the morning, when the day staff began arriving, the story of what had happened in Trauma Bay 1 was already moving through the corridors of Mercy General the way stories move. Fast, getting bigger, picking up details that may or may not have been true. By 8 o'clock, 3 different nurses had cornered Lena in the break room to hear the story from her directly. By 9, one of the surgical residents was telling the version where Lena had performed open-heart surgery with a ballpoint pen. By 10, the hospital administrator, a man named Carl Brewer, who wore bow ties and kept a motivational quote on his office whiteboard, had asked to speak with her personally. Lena sat across from Carl Brewer in a chair that was more comfortable than any chair in the break room and listened to him tell her she was a remarkable young woman. She said thank you. He asked her if she was doing all right after the trauma of the previous night. She said she was fine. He told her that Dr. Voss had filed a report about the incident and that there would be a review of the protocols involved. She nodded. "Just so you understand," Carl said carefully, "the review isn't necessarily a punitive process. It's more of a formality," Lena said. He blinked. "I was going to say an inquiry." "I understand," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You don't seem nervous." "Should I be?" He didn't have a good answer for that. He thanked her for her time and told her to have a good day. She stood up, smoothed her scrubs, and left his office. She was halfway down the hallway when Donna Briggs fell into step beside her. Donna was not a small woman, and she did not walk slowly, but she matched Lena's pace and said nothing for a few seconds. And that silence had weight to it. "You want to know what I think?" Donna finally said. "I think you're going to tell me either way," Lena said. A short sound came out of Donna that might have been a laugh. "What you did last night, you either got very lucky or you have done things that a 43-day nurse has no business having done." She paused. That needle placement was perfect. The angle, the depth, the speed. That wasn't luck. Lena kept walking. "I'm not saying it was wrong," Donna continued. "The man is alive. 20 bullet wounds and the man is alive. But people are asking questions, Lena. Questions I can't answer for you. Questions you're going to have to answer yourself, sooner or later." "I appreciate that, Donna." "Do you?" "Yes." Donna stopped walking. Lena kept going. She turned a corner and disappeared from Donna's line of sight, and Donna stood in the middle of the hallway for a moment, watching the empty space where the rookie nurse had been, with a feeling she could not entirely name. In the ICU on the 4th floor, the man with 20 bullet wounds had a name. It was on his intake chart as John Doe, because the paramedics who had brought him in had found no ID, no wallet, no phone. But the hospital's intake team had run a search on his fingerprints as a matter of standard procedure for unidentified patients. And the search had come back with something that made the intake coordinator, a woman named Sylvia, go very still in her chair. Not empty, not a dead end, a block. A specific kind of block that Sylvia had only seen twice in her 11 years at Mercy General. And both times it had turned out to be someone the federal government was very interested in. She picked up the phone and called Carl Brewer. Carl Brewer called hospital security. Hospital security called the number they were supposed to call in situations like this one, which was a direct line to a federal liaison office. And the person who answered that line listened to a 40-second description of the situation and then said, in a very even voice, "We'll send someone." At 12:15 that afternoon, 2 people walked through the front entrance of Mercy General Hospital. They were dressed professionally but not formally, the kind of clothes that say government without saying which department. The man was in his mid-40s, medium height, with a face that had been lived in hard. His name was Special Agent Daniel Rourke, and he had been doing this job for 19 years. And in those 19 years, he had learned that the best indicator of how complicated a situation was going to be was how calm the people involved seemed when they first encountered him. The woman with him was younger, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes and a dark ponytail. Her name was Agent Claire Weston, and she had a tablet in her hands and had already been reviewing files for the past 40 minutes. They spoke to Carl Brewer first. Carl told them about the patient in the ICU, about the fingerprint block, about the incident the night before. He showed them the trauma report. He told them the name of the nurse who had filed it. Agent Weston looked at the report. She looked at the name. She looked at Rourke. Something passed between them in that look. Not surprise exactly, but the particular alertness of people who have just heard a note that resonates unexpectedly with something they already know. Lena Cross, Weston said, reading from the report, first-year nurse, licensed 8 weeks ago, previously employed at, she scrolled through something on her tablet, nowhere. No previous employment on record. Before the nursing license, she has a degree from a university in Ohio that I've never heard of. And before that, another pause, longer this time. Nothing. No high school records. No tax filings before 6 years ago. No social media presence at any point, ever. She looked up. She's a ghost. How old is she? Rourke asked. 31, or that's what the file says. Rourke was quiet for a moment. Then, where is she right now? Carl checked his watch. She should be starting her afternoon shift in about 20 minutes. Rourke nodded slowly. Don't tell her we're here. In the changing room on the 2nd floor, Lena Cross was buttoning her scrubs for the 2nd day in a row when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, an unknown number. She stared at it for 3 full seconds. Then she silenced it and put the phone in her pocket and finished buttoning her shirt. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. The woman looking back at her was young-looking and ordinary-looking in the way that people who have worked very hard to appear ordinary tend to look. Brown hair pulled back. No jewelry. Gray eyes that in most lights looked completely neutral. She looked like exactly what she was supposed to look like. She took a slow breath. Then she picked up her badge, clipped it to her chest, Lena Cross, RN, in clean black letters, and walked out of the changing room to start her shift. She was at the nurse's station, reviewing her patient assignments for the afternoon, when she heard Donna Briggs behind her say, in a carefully controlled voice, "Lena, there are 2 people here who would like to speak with you." She kept her eyes on the chart in front of her, for exactly 1 second before she turned around. She looked at the two people standing at the end of the corridor in their professional clothes, with their professional expressions, and they looked back at her, and in the space of that first look, that initial moment of assessment, something moved between the three of them that was not what most people would have expected. Most people, when faced with two federal agents showing up at their workplace, show some version of fear, or surprise, or confusion, the whole human menu of responses to an unexpected confrontation. Lena Cross showed none of these things. She set down her chart, folded her hands in front of her, and said, in the same even voice she had used the night before in the trauma bay, "I was wondering when you'd get here." Agent Rourke held her gaze. He had 19 years of experience reading people, and what he was reading right now made him want to take half a step back. He did not take it. "Miss Cross," he said, "I'm Special Agent Daniel Rourke. This is Agent Claire Weston. We'd like to ask you a few questions." "About the patient in the ICU," she said, among other things. Lena nodded once. "Let me get someone to cover my patients." She turned back to the nurse's station. She caught Donna's eye. Donna was looking at her with an expression that had moved past curiosity and was now somewhere in the territory of genuine unease. "Pete can cover 4, 7, and 12, Lena said. "Tell him, Mr. Gerald in bed 4 is going to ask for more anti-nausea medication. He only gets one more dose tonight, per the chart." "Lena, I'll be back," she said, and she said it in the tone of someone who genuinely believed it. She turned and walked toward the two federal agents, and they fell into step on either side of her, and the three of them moved together down the corridor toward a conference room at the end of the hall. And Donna Briggs stood at the nurse's station and watched them go, and had the very specific, very unsettling feeling that the person walking between those two agents was not the less powerful one in that group. Not by a long shot. The conference room was small, a table, 4 chairs, a whiteboard with someone's half-erased medication schedule still visible on it. Rourke sat across from Lena. Weston stood near the door with her tablet. Nobody offered coffee. "Ms. Cross," Rourke began, "can you walk us through what happened last night in Trauma Bay 1? "I assume the paramedics' briefing would have covered that," she said. "I'd like to hear it from you." She told him, straightforwardly and in sequence, the way you tell a story when you have nothing to hide and you also know exactly how much to say. She described the patient's presentation, the absence of the attending physician, her clinical assessment, her decision to intervene, and the outcome. She used precise medical terminology throughout. She did not editorialize. She did not apologize. She did not ask if she'd done the right thing. Rourke listened. He had the quality of a good listener, the kind of stillness that makes people want to keep talking to fill the silence. Lena did not fill the silence. When she finished, he said, "That was a very thorough needle thoracostomy for someone 43 days into their first nursing job. The patient presented with classic signs. It wasn't complicated. The resident who was in that room told us he's done 12 needle thoracostomies in his career, and none of them went that smoothly. He may have been rattled," Lena said. "It was a stressful situation." "And you weren't rattled." She looked at him steadily. "I didn't say that. But you performed like someone who wasn't. People perform differently under stress. That's well documented." Rourke leaned back slightly in his chair. His expression had not changed since he sat down, but something behind his eyes had. He was recalibrating. She could tell. She had seen it before. The moment when someone realizes that the conversation they prepared for is not the conversation they are actually in. "Miss Cross," Weston said from near the door, not looking up from her tablet, "can you tell us where you were before you started at Mercy General?" "I was studying for my boards," Lena said. "And before that?" "I was in school, at Millbrook University in Columbus." "That's right. We couldn't find any record of Millbrook University being accredited before 2019, Weston said, and she did look up then, and her eyes were sharp and direct. which would make your degree from that institution potentially invalid. You should double-check that, Lena said. They received full accreditation in 2017. Weston made a small note on her tablet. Miss Cross, Rourke said, the patient you saved last night, do you know who he is? The question was designed to be simple. It was not a simple question. Lena let one beat pass. The chart says he's a John Doe. The chart says that, yes. Then that's what I know. Rourke watched her for a long moment. Then he opened a folder he had brought with him and slid a single photograph across the table. It was a grainy image, clearly from a surveillance camera of some kind, dated 14 months ago. In it, a man with a broad build and tactical gear was standing next to a vehicle in what appeared to be a desert environment. The image was poor quality. The man's face was partially turned away. Do you recognize this person? Rourke asked. Lena looked at the photograph. Her expression did not change. No, she said. He's the man in the ICU on the 4th floor, Rourke said. If you say so, Lena said. The lighting in the trauma bay was quite different. Rourke retrieved the photograph. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he said very quietly, Miss Cross, we're going to need to ask you to remain available for further questions. I'm not planning to go anywhere, she said. Good. He stood. Weston opened the door. Rourke extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm. Hers was firmer. One more thing, he said as she moved toward the door. The patient. He was conscious for about 11 minutes this morning before they sedated him again for a secondary procedure. During those 11 minutes, he said 4 words. He paused. He said your name. Both of them. Lena's hand was on the door. She did not turn around. Lena, Rourke continued, and then Walters. The hallway outside the conference room was quiet. Lena stepped into it and let the door close behind her. She stood there for a moment in the busy, ordinary corridor of a busy, ordinary hospital, with the names she had not heard in 3 years still hanging in the air behind her like smoke. Walters. She took a breath. She straightened her badge. She walked back toward the nurse's station, and when Pete looked up and asked if everything was okay, she told him it was fine and asked for an update on her patients. Her hands were not shaking this time, not even slightly. The name hung in the air for the rest of Lena's shift like a second heartbeat she couldn't slow down. Walters. She had not heard it spoken out loud in 3 years. Not since the morning she had walked away from everything attached to it. The rank, the clearance, the life that had made her into whoever she was before she became Lena Cross. She had been careful. She had been methodical. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up, layer by layer, the way you rebuild something that has been burned. Slowly, deliberately, making sure the foundation was solid enough to hold. And then a man with 20 bullet wounds had come through an ambulance bay, and she had done what her hands remembered how to do. And now 2 federal agents knew both of her names. She checked on Mr. Gerald in bed 4. He was asleep. She adjusted his blanket without waking him. She checked the medication chart for bed 7. She caught a transcription error that would have resulted in a double dose of a blood thinner. She corrected it in silence and initialed the chart and said nothing to anyone. She did not think about the conference room. She did not think about Rourke's voice, or the photograph, or the particular way he had said Walters, not as a question, but as a statement, laid down in front of her like a card on a table to see how she'd react. She had not reacted. That was the only thing she'd done right today. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Pete found her at the supply station and said, very quietly, like he was delivering bad news, "The guy upstairs, in the ICU, he's asking for you." Lena kept her eyes on the supply tray. He doesn't know me. He says your name, Lena. He keeps saying it. The ICU nurses are losing their minds up there because he won't calm down, and he won't tell them why he wants a floor nurse from the ER. And the charge up there called down here and asked if you'd be willing to. "I'll go," she said. Pete blinked. He had clearly expected more resistance. "You sure? Those FBI people are still in the building. I saw them talking to Brewer again about 20 minutes ago. Then I'd better go now, Lena said, and she picked up a fresh pair of gloves and walked toward the elevator. The ICU on the fourth floor had a particular kind of quiet, not peaceful quiet, the quiet of machines doing work that lungs and hearts and kidneys were supposed to do on their own. The quiet of bodies fighting battles that no one could see. The charge nurse, a compact, no-nonsense woman named Margaret, met Lena at the unit entrance and looked her up and down with the frank assessment of someone who had spent 30 years deciding who belonged in her unit and who didn't. "He's been agitated since they lightened his sedation at noon," Margaret said, walking her down the hall. "He pulled out his own arterial line an hour ago. Nearly gave Dr. Park a heart attack. We've been trying to keep him calm, but he won't talk to any of us. He just keeps saying the same thing." "What does he say?" "Your name." Margaret glanced at her sideways. "You know him?" "No," Lena said. Margaret's expression said she didn't entirely believe that, but she pushed the room door open anyway. The man in the bed was enormous. That was the first thing that struck anyone who saw him outside of the trauma bay. Not the wounds, not the drainage tubes, not the monitors tracking his vitals in green lines across a black screen, but the sheer physical scale of him. Even diminished by blood loss and surgery and 48 hours of unconsciousness, he looked like something that had been built rather than born. His eyes were open. They were dark blue, and they tracked Lena the moment she crossed the threshold. And they were more alert than they had any right to be for someone in his condition. "I need the room," he said. His voice was rough and low, worn down to the bone, but it was steady, completely steady. Margaret stiffened. "Sir, I'm not going to—" "Please." His eyes did not leave Lena's face. 2 minutes. Margaret looked at Lena. Lena gave her a small nod. Margaret stepped outside and pulled the door almost shut, and Lena walked to the side of the bed and stood there, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He looked at her the way people look at something they thought they had lost forever and have just found in an unexpected place, with a kind of stunned recognition that has grief somewhere underneath it. "You look different," he said. "You should be resting," she said. "You cut your hair." "Lieutenant Cross," she said it quietly, deliberately, like a hand placed on a door to hold it shut. "You don't know me. That's very important. Whatever you think you remember, you don't know me." Something moved across his face. Not hurt exactly, more like the specific pain of someone who understands the reason for a thing they don't want to accept. "They're here, aren't they?" he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "How many?" "2 that I've seen." He closed his eyes for a moment. His jaw was tight. When he opened them again, something in them had shifted. The disorientation was gone, replaced by something sharper, more familiar. "How bad is it?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "They found the name." His jaw tightened further. "Both?" "Yes." He was quiet for 3 seconds. She could hear the monitor tracking his heartbeat. It had gone up. "I didn't tell them anything," he said. "I woke up for 11 minutes and I didn't—" "You said my name," she said. "Both of them." The silence that followed was heavy enough to press down on both of them. He turned his face away from her and looked at the ceiling, and Lena watched the muscle in the side of his jaw work through something she did not have a word for. "I was out of it," he said. "I didn't know I was saying it out loud." "I know." "Lena, don't." Her voice was still low, still even, but there was something underneath it now, just barely audible, like a frequency at the edge of human hearing. "Don't call me that right now. Not here." He turned back to look at her. His eyes were full of something complicated and old. "They're going to find out. Whatever cover you built, it's not going to hold. These aren't local agents, Lena. If Rourke is on this, it means someone above the regional level is—" "I know who Rourke is," she said. That stopped him. He looked at her carefully. "How do you know Rourke?" She didn't answer. "Lena," his voice dropped further, "how do you know Daniel Rourke?" The door opened. Margaret's voice came through the gap. "I'm sorry, but his pressure is climbing. I need to—" "I'm leaving," Lena said, and she stepped back from the bed, and she looked at the man in it one final time, and the look she gave him carried enough information for someone who knew how to read it. It said, "Be still, be quiet, hold on, don't trust anyone." And then she walked out. In the hallway, Margaret gave her a look that was edging toward alarmed. "His heart rate was 107. Whatever you two were talking about—" "He'll settle," Lena said. "Keep the sedation light. He responds badly to full suppression." She was already moving toward the elevator. "Page me if anything changes." She did not wait for Margaret's response. The elevator doors closed, and Lena stood in the small metal box alone for the 12 seconds it took to reach the second floor. And in those 12 seconds, she did something she had not allowed herself to do since the moment she'd seen those two agents walking through Mercy General's front doors. She calculated, not panicked, not frantically, the cold, geometric kind of calculating she had learned to do in places where the cost of getting it wrong was not measured in money or reputation, but in something much more final. She ran through what they knew: the name, the fingerprint block that had triggered the call, her needle placement, which had been too perfect for someone who had never done it before in a civilian setting, the 20-bullet wound patient himself, whose existence in this hospital was already a federal matter, regardless of anything she had done. She ran through what they didn't know. Everything else she hoped. The doors opened. She stepped out. Agent Rourke was standing in the hallway 14 feet away, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, looking like a man who had been waiting for exactly as long as he'd expected to wait. "Fourth floor?" he said mildly. "Patient consult," she said, and kept walking. He fell into step beside her. She didn't slow down. "The patient in room 412 specifically requested a floor nurse from the ER," he said. "That's unusual. Patients get attached. It happens." "His name is Jason Cross," Rourke said. She did not break stride. She did not blink. She turned a corner and headed toward the stairwell and said, "The chart still says John Doe." "The chart is going to be updated shortly." He caught the stairwell door before it closed behind her and followed her in. Their footsteps echoed. Jason Matthew Cross, Lieutenant, Naval Special Warfare Command. Classified operational history, which is why the fingerprint pulled a block instead of a record. But we have friends with the right clearances. He paused on the landing. "You know what's interesting, though?" Lena stopped. She turned and looked at him. They were alone in the stairwell, and the fluorescent light was unforgiving. And she looked at him with the full weight of her gray eyes and said nothing. "His emergency contact," Rourke said, "the one buried in a file that took us 6 hours to get access to. His emergency contact is listed as a woman named Lena Walters." He let that sit in the air for a moment. Same last name, different first 4 letters. Another pause. "And that woman has been officially listed as deceased for 3 years. Lots of people share surnames," Lena said. "His file says she was his wife." The stairwell was very quiet. "I'm sorry for his loss," Lena said, and she turned and continued down the stairs. Rourke's voice followed her. "He recognized you, Ms. Cross. A man fresh out of surgery with 20 bullet wounds and enough blood loss to kill 2 average men woke up and said your name. Not a common name, not a name you'd confuse. Your name." She pushed through the ground floor door without responding. She walked back to the ER. She picked up her chart. She went to bed 7 and checked on her patient, a 40-year-old construction worker named Danny, who had a kidney stone the size of a small marble and the pain tolerance of someone encountering genuine suffering for the first time. He looked at her with eyes glazed with medication and said, "Is it gonna kill me?" "No, Danny," she said. "You're going to be fine." "You sure?" "I'm sure." He subsided against his pillow. Lena noted his vitals on the chart. Her handwriting was perfectly steady. It was 6:40 in the evening when Dr. Voss found her. She had been expecting him since the morning. He had filed the report and then gone quiet, which was not the behavior of a man who had processed his feelings about the previous night and reached acceptance. It was the behavior of a man who was building something. He came up behind her at the medication station, and unlike the previous morning when he had slammed a chart and broadcast his anger to the whole floor, this time he was quiet. Which was, she had learned in 43 days, more dangerous. "Walk with me," he said. She capped the syringe she was holding, placed it carefully in the tray, and walked with him to the small office at the back of the ER that he used for paperwork and phone calls, and apparently, this. He closed the door. He did not sit. He stood with his arms crossed in the center of the room and looked at her with an expression that she recognized as a man wrestling between his professional obligation and something else, something more personal and harder to name. "I've been a trauma surgeon for 22 years, he said. "In that time, I have trained more residents and fellows than I can count. I know what a trained hand looks like. I know what it looks like when someone has done a procedure once versus 10 times versus 100 times. He paused. "You have done a needle thoracostomy more than 100 times, Lena. Your hands knew exactly where to go. You didn't measure. You didn't hesitate. You placed that needle the way I place it. The way I place it after 22 years. She said nothing. "I also reviewed the vasopressor adjustment you made on the drip," he continued. "That was a calculation that our second-year surgical resident got wrong. You caught it without being asked and corrected it without announcing it. That's not nursing school training. That's not 43 days in an ER. His voice had dropped. "That's field medicine. That's someone who has worked in conditions where you don't have time to consult or confirm or defer. You just act." The room was very quiet. "I'm not going to pretend I know what your story is," Voss said. "I've been around long enough to know that people have reasons for reinventing themselves. God knows this hospital has seen more than a few people running from something." He uncrossed his arms. "But I need you to understand something. Those FBI agents have been in this building for 7 hours. They've spoken to Carl Brewer 3 times. They've been in the ICU. They've requested copies of every piece of documentation associated with last night, including your personnel file." He looked at her directly. "Your personnel file, Lena, not the patient chart, yours." "I appreciate you telling me," she said. "Is there something I should know?" he asked. And for a moment he was not Dr. Harold Voss, the senior trauma surgeon who had grabbed her wrist that morning with rage in his eyes. He was just a man asking a genuine question. "Something that might help me understand what I'm dealing with?" She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, very quietly, "You saved him, Dr. Voss. Everything after the decompression, that was you. That was your 22 years. She paused. "Make sure that's what the report says." He stared at her. "Why does that matter?" "Because you're the one with a career worth protecting," she said. She left his office. He stood alone in the small room and felt, for reasons he could not entirely articulate, that he had just been given something, and he wasn't sure yet whether it was a gift or a warning. At 7:52 that evening, Weston found something. She was in the small conference room that Carl Brewer had made available to them, with 2 laptops open and a third screen running a database search that had been cycling through federal records for the past 4 hours. Rourke was on the phone in the hallway. Weston was doing what she was best at, the quiet, granular work of finding the thread in a story that doesn't add up and pulling it until the whole thing unravels. The thread she found was not what she had expected. She had been running cross-references between the name Lena Walters and classified operational records from the previous decade, working backward through the layers of clearance redaction that made most of those files look like abstract art. She had found references, partial ones, names blacked out but descriptors left, female, medical, embedded, non-commissioned, attached to 3 separate overseas operations in a 4-year window. She had found a commendation that had no name attached to it, but referenced a medical intervention in a hostile environment that had resulted in the survival of 4 personnel who should not have survived. And she had found, buried in the footnotes of a decommissioned operational file, a reference to a personal loss, the death of a handler, a husband, in the field, and a subsequent administrative separation that had been processed as a standard medical discharge. She had found all of this. And then she had found one more thing. One line in a document that should have been fully redacted, but had been imperfectly processed, leaving a fragment of a name visible in the bottom margin. L. Walters, cleared for reintegration. Non-disclosure active. Do not approach. Weston read that line 3 times. Then she picked up her phone and called Rourke. He came in from the hallway and she showed him the screen without saying anything. He read it. The silence in the room changed quality. Do not approach, he said. That's what it says. That came from our own people. Yes, Weston said, or from someone above our people. Rourke straightened up. He looked at the screen for another moment. Then he looked at the door. She's still on shift? For another 2 hours. Don't bring her in again tonight, he said. Don't approach her. Don't corner her. Don't. Someone is going to have to tell me why, Weston said, and her voice had an edge to it that was new. Because from where I'm sitting, we have a woman operating under a false identity in direct proximity to a classified military asset, and someone in our chain of command apparently knew she was out here and decided to let her walk. That's not a footnote, Daniel. That's a decision someone made, and I want to know who made it and why. Rourke was quiet for a long moment. Outside the conference room, the sounds of the hospital continued. Distant monitors, a cart rolling past, a voice on an intercom calling for an orderly. The ordinary sounds of a place where people came to be put back together. Let me make some calls, he said. You've been saying that all day. Claire. I'm serious, she stood up. If someone above us cleared her for reintegration and imposed a non-approach order, then someone above us has a significant interest in keeping her invisible. And now she's not invisible. She saved a classified operator's life in the middle of an ER with 40 witnesses, and we are sitting in this building with both her names in our files. She paused. Whatever is coming from whoever made that call, it is coming fast. Rourke did not argue with her because she was right. He picked up his phone. He looked at the number he needed to call and felt the particular, bone-deep reluctance of a man who has spent 19 years believing he was on the right side of something and is beginning to wonder whether the map he has been using is accurate. He made the call. It rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, a voice he recognized, belonging to a man 2 levels above his direct superior. And the first thing that voice said was not hello. It was, "You're at Mercy, General." "Yes, sir," Rourke said. "Walk away," the voice said. "Tonight, both of you. Walk away and let us handle the Cross matter through appropriate channels." "Sir, we have documentation that—" "Agent Rourke," the voice was very calm. "I'm going to say this once. The woman you are looking at is not a problem you are cleared to solve. She is not a case you are cleared to build. You are going to close your laptops, thank the hospital administrator for his cooperation, and leave. Do you understand me?" Rourke stood in the small conference room with the phone against his ear and looked at Weston, who was watching him with the expression of someone who can only hear one side of a conversation, but is reading the other side clearly in his face. "Understood," he said. He ended the call. The room was quiet. Weston stared at him. What did he say? Rourke looked at the door, then at his phone, then at the document on Weston's screen with its imperfectly redacted fragment. "Do not approach." "He said we're done here," Rourke said. Weston's jaw tightened. "We're just going to walk away." "He said walk away. And you're going to do that." Rourke didn't answer immediately. He looked at the screen one more time, the fragment of a name, the commendation without a name, the 4-year operational window, and the husband who died in the field, and the woman who had rebuilt herself from nothing into something that could walk through an FBI interrogation without flinching. All of it sitting in front of him like a story with the last chapter torn out. He reached past Weston and closed the laptop. "Pack up," he said quietly. Weston did not move for a moment. Then she said, "She saved his life, Daniel. A man with 20 bullet wounds. She brought him back with her hands, and she did it in 43 days under a name that isn't hers. And someone up the chain wants us to pretend we never saw her." Her voice had gone flat in the way that voices go flat when the emotion underneath them is too large to express any other way. "Doesn't that bother you?" Rourke picked up his own bag. He looked at his partner of 6 years, and he said, very quietly, the truest thing he'd said all day. "More than I'm allowed to show." They began to pack. Down on the second floor, in the changing room at the end of the shift corridor, Lena Cross was standing at her locker. She had just come off an 8-hour shift. Her feet hurt. Her shoulder hurt, where Voss had grabbed her that morning, though she hadn't mentioned it to anyone and wasn't going to. She opened her locker and stood looking at the small collection of things inside it. Her civilian jacket, her phone, a photograph she kept taped to the inside of the door that she did not let herself look at for very long. She looked at it now, a man's face. Dark blue eyes, not unlike the ones that had tracked her from a hospital bed 4 floors up. A smile that was private and genuine in the way of someone who didn't smile for audiences. A beach, somewhere warm. A day that had been, for exactly the hours it lasted, entirely without consequence. She pressed 2 fingers against the photograph. Then she closed the locker. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. This time she answered. Silence on the other end. And then a voice she had not heard in 3 years. Not Rourke's voice. Not anyone from the FBI. A voice that belonged to a world she had been very sure she had left behind. "We need to talk," the voice said. "Tonight, before they do." Lena stood in the empty changing room with the phone against her ear and felt the past arriving the way it always did. Not with noise, not with warning, but with the quiet, absolute certainty of something that was always on its way. "I know," she said. The voice on the phone belonged to a man named Colonel Warren Silk, and the fact that he was calling her at all meant that whatever wall she had built between her old life and this one had not just cracked, it had come down entirely. "Where?" she said. "There's a diner on Callaway Street, blue awning, 30 minutes. "I know the place," she said. "Of course you do." There was something in his voice, not warmth exactly, but the specific texture of a man who respects the person he is speaking to and finds that respect inconvenient right now. "Come alone. Leave your phone at the hospital." He ended the call. Lena stood in the changing room for exactly 4 more seconds. Then she put the phone in her locker, put on her civilian jacket, and walked out of the hospital through the side entrance that the maintenance staff used, the one without a camera directly above the door. She had identified it on day 2. Outside, the night air was cold enough to bite. She walked fast, hands in her pockets, through 3 blocks of the kind of neighborhood that surrounds hospitals. Pharmacies, cheap restaurants, a laundromat, a bar with its neon sign buzzing in the dark. She did not look behind her. She did not need to. She could feel whether she was being followed the same way some people can feel a change in weather. Not with conscious attention, but with the body's older, quieter intelligence. She was not being followed. Not yet. The diner had 6 customers and a tired waitress, and the specific smell of coffee that has been sitting on a burner for too long. Women's Silk was in the back booth, and he looked exactly the way she remembered him. Silver-haired, compact, with a face that had been forged by decades of making decisions that other people never knew had been made. He was wearing civilian clothes. He did not stand when she sat down. "You look well," he said. "Don't do that," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he put down his coffee cup and said, "All right." The waitress came by. Lena ordered coffee she wasn't going to drink. The waitress left. "How much do they have?" Lena asked. Rourke's team pulled a partial from the operational archives. The non-disclosure flag triggered automatically when they hit the clearance wall, and the non-approach protocol kicked in 2 hours ago through channels above Rourke's pay grade. Silk folded his hands on the table. He's been ordered to stand down. He'll comply. Weston won't like it. Weston doesn't have a choice. A pause. Neither do you. Something shifted in Lena's expression. Not much, just enough that someone who knew her would notice. That's why you called. You broke cover, Lena. His voice was quiet and entirely without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. Not intentionally. I understand that. 20 bullet wounds in a trauma bay without a surgeon. You did what your hands know how to do. I'm not here to condemn you for that. He paused again. But the moment you decompress that lung, you stop being invisible. And invisible was the arrangement. The arrangement was made by people who thought they knew what I needed, she said. The arrangement was made to protect you. The arrangement was made to protect an asset. The word came out of her mouth like something she'd been holding between her teeth for a long time. I stopped being a person to that office a long time before Marcus died. The name landed between them like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples moved outward in every direction. Silk did not flinch. He had known Marcus Cross for 11 years. He had recruited him. He had sent him into the field 17 times. He had been the one to make the call that put him in the operation where he died. And he carried that the way men in his position carry those things. Silently, permanently, with no visible sign. I know, Silk said. Then you know why I left. I know why you left. I also know that Jason is alive on the 4th floor of that hospital because you were there. He looked at her steadily. Marcus's brother is alive because of you. Lena looked down at the untouched coffee in front of her. Her jaw was tight. I didn't know it was him when I went in. Didn't you? The question sat there. She didn't answer it immediately, and the not answering was itself an answer, and Silk was too experienced to press it. She had not known. Not in the first second. Not in the chaos of the trauma bay with the lights and the noise and the paramedic's voice cutting through everything. But somewhere in the 2 hours she had spent in that room, working alongside Voss, managing the lines and the blood and the numbers, somewhere in that time, she had looked at the face of the man on the table and seen something in the architecture of it that she recognized. Not consciously, not in a way she had let herself acknowledge, but her hands had known. Her hands had worked with a precision and a ferocity that went beyond professional obligation. And the reason for it was not something she was prepared to say out loud in a diner on Calloway Street. He's going to remember things, Silk said. When the sedation lifts completely, when he's fully alert, he's going to remember what he saw in that room. He's going to remember your technique. And he knows what your technique means, because he was there the night you used it the first time, in a situation that is never going to appear in any civilian record. I know, she said. He'll push for answers. He's a SEAL, Lena. Pushing for answers is what they do when everything else has been taken away. I know that too. So what do you want to do? She looked up. It was the first time since she had sat down that she looked at him with anything other than guarded restraint. And what he saw in her face for that one unguarded second was not the woman who had rebuilt herself into Lena Cross, RN, 43 days employed, quiet and invisible and careful. It was someone older and heavier and far more tired than any 31-year-old had a right to be. I want to finish my shift tomorrow, she said. I want to check on Mr. Gerald in bed 4. I want to catch a dosing error that the resident missed and not say anything about it. I want to do the job I trained for. She paused. That's what I want. Silk was quiet for a long moment. Then, that's not an answer to my question. No, she agreed. It isn't. She stood. She picked up her jacket. She left a $10 bill on the table next to the untouched coffee. Lena, his voice caught her before she turned away. The people who put together your cover, the ones above my level who added the non-approach protocol, they're not doing it to protect you anymore. There's a reason they want Rourke to stand down. There's a reason they want this quiet, and it has nothing to do with your welfare. He held her gaze. Whatever you decide to do next, do it knowing that. She stood there for a moment. What are they protecting? The operation that got Marcus killed, he said, and the 8 people who are still in positions of authority who signed off on the decisions that put him there. The diner was very quiet. The tired waitress was refilling someone's water glass at the counter. A man 2 tables over was reading a folded newspaper. Are you one of them? Lena asked. Silk did not look away. I signed the secondary authorization, not the primary. A pause. I've been carrying that since the day it happened. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that the waitress looked over, sensing something in the air between these 2 people that she couldn't name. Good night, Colonel, Lena said. She walked out. The next morning came in gray and cold, and Lena Cross arrived at Mercy General at 6:45 for a 7 o'clock shift, which was 15 minutes earlier than required, and which she used to review the overnight charts for her patients before anyone could brief her and filter what she was allowed to know. Mr. Gerald had been discharged at midnight, happy and embarrassed, and clutching a pamphlet about dietary adjustments for acid reflux. She was glad. She had liked him. The kidney stone patient, Danny, had passed the stone at 3 in the morning, and the overnight nurse had noted that he had cheered out loud and then immediately apologized to the patient in the next bed. She smiled at that briefly to herself. She was reviewing the 3rd chart when Donna Briggs appeared at her shoulder, and the expression on Donna's face was one Lena had not seen before. Not the wary professional appraisal of the past 2 days, but something closer to genuine alarm. 4th floor called down at 6:30, Donna said low. Jason Cross, the John Doe, he checked himself out. Lena went still. He can't check himself out. He's got drainage tubes and a partially repaired. He signed a refusal of care form, and he got out of bed and he left. Donna's voice was tight. Margaret tried to stop him. He told her very politely that he was going to leave with or without the paperwork, and she should choose. She chose the paperwork. A beat. He was asking for you when they brought him his clothes. Margaret told him you weren't in yet. Where did he go? Nobody knows. Lena put down the chart. She thought about Silk's voice in the diner. The non-approach protocol. Rourke ordered to stand down. 8 people with signatures on a document. A man who had woken up from 20 bullet wounds, and the first word out of his mouth had been her name. Is Rourke still in the building? She asked. Donna blinked. The FBI agents? No. They left last night around 9. Carl Brewer saw them to the door personally. A pause. Why, Lena, what is... I need you to cover my patients for an hour, Lena said. What? You just got here. I'll be back. She was already moving toward the elevator. Donna, 1 hour. Donna stood at the nurse's station watching her go and said, to nobody in particular, this woman is going to give me a cardiac event. He was in the hospital chapel. It was not an obvious choice, and that was exactly why it was the right one. The chapel at Mercy General was on the ground floor near the south entrance. Low traffic, rarely visited outside of visiting hours, with a single security camera in the hallway outside that had been at a 40-degree angle to the door since a maintenance issue 3 months ago that nobody had gotten around to fixing. Lena had noted it on day 6. Jason Cross was sitting in the second row of chairs, dressed in civilian clothes that were a size too small across the shoulders. Someone had clearly brought them to the hospital for him, and whoever had done it had either not accounted for his build or had no better option. He looked terrible. He looked like a man who had been shot 20 times and had then, through a combination of will and stubbornness that bordered on pathological, refused to stay in the bed where the rest of his recovery was supposed to happen. There was a thin line of sweat on his forehead. His face was pale under its natural tan. He looked up when she came in. You need to go back upstairs, she said. Sit down, he said. Jason, please, he said it the same way he'd said it to Margaret the night before. Not as a request exactly, but not as a command either. Something in between. Something that acknowledged the person he was asking, while making clear that he needed the answer to be yes. She sat down, not beside him, one chair over. He looked at her for a moment. He was trying to read her face the way he had always been able to, back in a time before she had worked very hard to make her face unreadable. He found more resistance now than he used to. That seemed to both impress and pain him in equal measure. "Silk called you," he said. "Yes." "What did he tell you?" "Enough." "Did he tell you why the op went wrong?" His voice had tightened. "Did he tell you about the secondary authorization? The decision that changed the extraction window without telling Marcus's team?" "He mentioned the authorization. Did he tell you that the people who made that call are still operational? That 3 of them are currently embedded in positions that give them direct access to classified military medical records?" His jaw was working. His color was not good. "That one of them is the person who ordered Rourke to stand down last night?" Lena went very still. "How do you know about Rourke's orders?" she asked. "Because I made a phone call at 4 this morning from a borrowed cell phone while Margaret was at the other end of the unit." His voice was flat and direct. "I have people, Lena. Not many, not anymore, but I have people. And what they told me in that phone call is the reason I am sitting in this chair instead of on the 4th floor where everyone wants me to be." She looked at him carefully. "What did they tell you?" "The non-approach protocol on your file wasn't protective," he said. "It was a lid, something to keep you contained, quiet, invisible, unreachable. Because if you ever started talking about what you knew about the Carver operation, about the decisions that were made in the 18 hours before Marcus walked into that building, about the people who changed the extraction window and why," he stopped. His breathing was slightly labored and he was aware of it, and he was fighting it. "You're not a protected asset. You're a sealed box. And the people who sealed you are terrified that someone with the right questions finally found you." The chapel was very quiet. Somewhere outside the door, the hospital continued its ordinary life. Footsteps, a distant announcement over an intercom, the faint sound of a cart. "Rourke," Lena said slowly, "he was ordered to stand down. But he's been doing this for 19 years, and Weston is the sharpest analyst his office has. They were pulled. Completely. Their case file was flagged and transferred to a different office by 9:30 last night." Jason looked at her. "An office that has one of those 3 names in it." Lena sat with that for a moment. The geometry of it was taking shape in her mind, the way it always had, not in words but in structure, in the spatial relationship between the pieces, where the pressure was coming from and where it was going and what it was designed to prevent. "They know I'm here," she said. "They've known for 48 hours. The moment your name went into the incident report, someone in that office got a flag." His voice was low and precise. "The FBI showing up wasn't coincidental. They were sent here to assess how much you knew and how visible you'd become. When it turned out you'd brought back a classified operator in front of 40 witnesses, the assessment changed." "From containable to complicated," she said. "Yes." She looked at him directly for the first time since she'd sat down. He was watching her with those dark blue eyes that were too alert for a man in his condition, and she could see the cost of that alertness in the lines around his mouth and the set of his shoulders. He was running on adrenaline and stubbornness and the specific, dangerous resolve of someone who has decided that being careful is no longer the priority. "You should have stayed upstairs," she said, and this time her voice had something in it that had not been there before. Something that was not professional or guarded or strategic. Something that was just tired and honest and real. "I know," he said, "but you would have disappeared before I could." "I wasn't going to disappear." "You've been disappearing for 3 years," he said quietly. The words did not come out as an accusation. That was what made them so hard to absorb. They came out as a simple statement of observable fact. delivered by someone who had watched the disappearing happen and had not been given any ability to stop it, and who had spent 3 years carrying the specific grief of someone who has lost a person that is technically still alive. Lena looked at the back of the chair in front of her. She was quiet for long enough that the silence had texture. "You should have let the FBI do their job," she said finally. "Rourke is a good agent. If they'd been allowed to follow the thread leads to people who have the power to cut it," Jason said, "and then cut everything attached to it." He paused. "Including you." "I can handle Lena." His voice broke slightly, just on the first syllable of her name, and he caught it and steadied, but it had been there, and they both heard it. "I watched my brother walk into a building because someone changed a window that no one told him had changed. I have been living with that for 3 years. I am not going to watch something happen to you because I was on the 4th floor following orders." He stopped, steadied again. "Not again." The chapel was so quiet she could hear him breathing. Slightly too fast, slightly too shallow. The breathing of a body that was doing more than it should be doing 4 days out of a trauma bay. "You're bleeding," she said. He looked down. There was a dark stain spreading through the left side of his shirt, slow and steady. One of the surgical repair sites. She had known the moment she walked in, had clocked it in the first second the way her hands clocked things, and had said nothing because the conversation had been more urgent. "I'm aware," he said. She was already moving. She had gauze in her jacket pocket. She had stopped being surprised at herself for carrying it, and she had it pressed against his side before he could tell her not to. He made a sound that was not quite a gasp and was not quite a word. "Hold that," she said. He put his hand over hers to hold the gauze in place. His hand was large and very warm, and she was acutely, uncomfortably aware of it, and she did not move her hand away. She pressed harder. He kept his hand on hers. "You need to go back to the ICU," she said. "I know. And then you need to stay there." "I know. And you need to stop making decisions while you are—" "I know, Lena." He said it gently. She stopped talking. He was looking at her not with the tactical alertness of a few minutes ago, but with something quieter and older. "I just needed to tell you what I told you, before you made any decisions of your own." She looked at the gauze under their hands. The bleeding was slowing. Not stopped, but slowing. He needed a surgical consult, probably a resuture on the repair site, and an IV and a blood pressure check, and about 72 more hours of things she was not going to be able to give him in a hospital chapel. "Can you walk?" she said. "Yes." "Then walk." She stood and held out her hand. He took it and came to his feet with the controlled care of someone managing significant pain through sheer discipline. And for a moment he was standing close enough that she could see the exact shade of his eyes, which were the same color as Marcus's had been, which was something she had been careful not to notice on the 4th floor and was finding harder to avoid at this distance. She stepped back. She kept her hand in his. She walked him to the door of the chapel, and she paused there with her hand on the handle. "The 3 names," she said, "the ones you mentioned, do you have documentation?" "My people are working on it." "How long?" "Days, maybe less." She pushed the door open. "Don't die before then," she said. Something crossed his face that, under other circumstances, in a different life, she might have called the beginning of a smile. He did not say anything. She walked him to the elevator. On the 3rd floor, Donna Briggs was standing at the nurse's station, looking at her watch with the expression of a woman who has been promised 1 hour and is watching it become 90 minutes. She looked up when Lena appeared, and then she looked at the very large man next to Lena, with the bloody shirt and the pallor of someone who had recently made several extremely poor medical decisions, and she closed her eyes briefly. "Charge nurse on 4, Lena said before Donna could speak. "Tell them he's coming up. Tell them he needs a surgical consult on the left lateral repair, probable resuture, and someone should check the secondary drain while they're at it." "You want me to call ahead?" Donna said, flat, exhausted. Please. Donna picked up the phone. Then she stopped and looked at the man with the bloody shirt and said, with the particular resigned authority of someone who has been a charge nurse for 20 years and has therefore seen, literally, everything. The next time you sign a refusal of care form on my watch, I am going to personally make sure you regret it. Jason Cross looked at Donna Briggs. Something in her directness seemed to reach through the pain and the adrenaline and land somewhere genuine. And he said, yes, ma'am. Donna looked at Lena. Lena said nothing. Donna dialed. Lena walked Jason to the elevator. She pressed the button for the 4th floor. She stepped back as the doors opened. Whatever you decide, he said from inside the elevator, I'll back you, whatever it costs. Get resutured, she said. The doors closed. She stood in front of the closed elevator for a moment. Then she turned and went back to the nurse's station and picked up her chart and her pen and her carefully constructed ordinary life. And she stood there with all of it in her hands. And underneath the surface of her expression, underneath the calm and the competence and the 43-day nurse who kept her head down and did her job, something was moving. Something that had been still for 3 years. She uncapped her pen. She wrote a note in a patient chart. She did it with perfectly steady hands and a mind that was already 3 moves ahead. Donna watched her from the other end of the station. She didn't say anything, but she did not look away. The shift ended at 3 in the afternoon, and Lena did not go home. She sat in her car in the hospital parking structure for 11 minutes, not moving, not looking at her phone, which was still in her locker where she had left it before meeting Silk. Just thinking. Running the geometry, laying out the pieces the way she used to lay out pieces in a different life, on a different kind of table, with different stakes but the same fundamental problem. Too many people with too much power had decided that the most convenient version of events was one where she did not exist. 3 years ago, she had accepted that. She had taken the name, the nursing degree, the studio apartment, the 43-day job at a mid-sized urban hospital. And she had told herself that disappearing was a form of survival, and that survival was what Marcus would have wanted for her, and that the quiet life was not a surrender, but a choice. She had believed most of that. She had been working on believing the rest. And then a man had come through an ambulance bay with 20 bullet wounds, and her hands had remembered who they were, and the quiet life had come apart at every seam. She got out of the car. She did not go to her apartment. She walked 3 blocks east to a public library that she had identified in her first week as a place with public computers, decent Wi-Fi, and staff who did not pay close attention to what patrons were doing. She sat down at a terminal in the back corner, and she worked for 40 minutes, moving through a sequence of steps that she had memorized years ago and had never expected to use again. By the end of those 40 minutes, she had accessed 3 separate secure document repositories and had downloaded to an encrypted thumb drive she kept on her keychain, disguised as a loyalty card fob, 17 files that she had spent 3 years pretending she did not know how to find. The files were related to Operation Carver, the operation where Marcus died. She walked out of the library and straight into Special Agent Claire Weston. Not literally. Weston was standing on the library steps, coat collar up against the cold, a paper cup of coffee in both hands, looking at Lena with an expression that was not surprise. It was the expression of someone who has been waiting and is relieved that the waiting is over. I told Rourke I needed an hour, Weston said. He thinks I'm getting dinner. Lena looked at her. You were ordered to stand down. Rourke was ordered to stand down, Weston said. The order came through his chain of command. I'm technically on personal time right now. She paused. And I'm also technically the only person in our office who ran the full cross-reference on the Carver file before it got flagged and transferred. She held up a small notebook, old-fashioned, paper. I have a very good memory, and I write fast. Lena stood on the library steps and looked at this woman who was either the most useful person she'd encountered in 3 years or an exceptionally well-constructed trap. She ran the calculation fast and hard and came out on the same side both times. "There's a coffee shop on Mercer," Lena said. "2 blocks. They have a back room they rent out for study groups. It'll be empty this time of day." Weston nodded. "Lead the way." The back room of the coffee shop smelled like old wood and somebody's abandoned lunch. They sat across from each other at a table the size of a small desk, and Weston opened her notebook, and Lena put the thumb drive on the table between them, and for a moment they both looked at it. "You want to tell me how you access classified federal archives from a public library terminal?" Weston said. "No," Lena said. "Fair enough." Weston looked at the thumb drive. "What's on it?" "Operational files from Carver, pre-mission authorization records, communication logs from the 18-hour window before the extraction." Lena's voice was level. "And the amendment to the extraction timeline that was filed 3 hours before Marcus Cross walked into the target building. The amendment that his team was never notified of." Weston went very still. "That amendment," Lena continued, "was authorized by 2 signatures. One belongs to a man named Garrett Foss, who currently holds a senior position at the Defense Intelligence Agency. The other belongs to a woman named Carol Brandt, who transferred to the FBI's National Security Division 14 months ago." She paused. "Which is why Rourke's case file was flagged and transferred to a different office. Brandt's office." Weston set down her coffee cup. She looked at Lena with the eyes of someone reassembling the entire architecture of a case she had been building for 6 hours, and realizing that the foundation she had started from was correct, but the blueprint she'd been using was incomplete. "She transferred the file to herself," Weston said, "to her deputy, clean enough to survive a casual audit." Lena looked at her. "How deep is your relationship with Rourke?" 19 years, Weston said without hesitating. "He was my training supervisor. He's the most honest person I know in this job." A beat. "He was genuinely going to comply with the stand-down order. You should know that about him." "I do know that about him," Lena said. "That's why I'm talking to you instead of him." Weston absorbed this. Then she opened her notebook to a page covered in tight, precise handwriting and turned it so Lena could read it. "This is everything I pulled from the Carver Cross reference before the file transferred. Names, dates, the operational window, the 3 personnel still in active positions." She pointed to 2 lines near the bottom. "Foss and Brandt are both on it. There are 2 others." Lena looked at the notebook. She recognized every name on the list. One of them made her jaw tighten in a way she did not try to hide. "Silk," she said. "Secondary authorization. He told you?" "Last night." She looked up. "He says he's carrying it. People who are carrying something usually don't sit on it for 3 years while the people above them stay in office." Weston's voice was not without sympathy, but it was direct. "Whatever Colonel Silk told you in that diner, his cooperation was limited to telling you enough to feel warned without actually giving you anything you could use." Lena was quiet for a moment. She had known this. She had known it walking out of the diner, known it in the library, known it in the cold, specific way she knew things that she did not want to be true. "What do you need from me?" "Your testimony," Weston said, "on record. Everything you know about the operational decisions made in the Carver window, your husband's final briefing, and what it included versus what the amendment changed. The chain of command decisions that altered the extraction timeline." She held Lena's gaze. "I know what that means for you. I know what it costs. Your cover, your identity, everything you built. I know what it costs," Lena said. "Then I'm asking you to decide if it's worth it." The back room was quiet. Outside, the sounds of the coffee shop continued. The hiss of an espresso machine, a burst of laughter from somewhere near the front, a door opening and closing. The ordinary world moving through its ordinary motions, entirely unaware that in a back room, 2 women were sitting across from each other with 17 classified files between them and the names of 4 people who had decided that one man's life was an acceptable operational variable. "There's something else," Lena said. Weston waited. "Jason Cross, The patient from the ICU. He told me this morning that his contacts have documentation. Physical documentation, not digital. From someone inside the operation who kept records independently. Lena looked at her. He said days, maybe less. Weston leaned forward. Who is his contact? He didn't say, and I didn't push, because he had reopened a surgical repair site and I needed him back on the 4th floor. A pause. But if he has physical documentation that corroborates what's on this drive, then you have something that Brandt can't flag and transfer. Something that exists outside the federal system. Weston looked at her notebook, then at the thumb drive, then at Lena. She was doing what good analysts do, running the weight of each piece, the gaps between them, the places where the structure was solid and the places where it was held together by assumption. I need to call Rourke, she said. Not on your work phone, Lena said. Weston reached into her coat and produced a second phone. A basic prepaid model that looked like it had been purchased at a gas station. She looked at it and then at Lena. I bought this 3 hours ago, she said, when I realized where the Carver file had transferred to. For the first time since this had all started, Lena felt something that was almost, not quite, but almost like relief. Not because the situation was safe. It was very far from safe, but because she was no longer standing in it alone. And that was a change that her body registered before her mind caught up with it. Call him, she said. Rourke answered on the second ring. Weston talked for 4 minutes. She was precise and fast, and she gave him only what he needed and nothing extra. The way people speak when they know the call needs to be short. When she finished, there was silence on the other end for long enough that Lena, sitting across the table, could feel the weight of it. Say that last part again, Rourke said. Brandt, Weston said. Carol Brandt. She authorized the Carver timeline amendment. She transferred our file. She's the reason we were told to stand down. Another silence. Longer this time. Where are you? He said. Weston looked at Lena. Lena shook her head once. Weston said, I'll find you in 2 hours. Don't use your work phone. She ended the call. They looked at each other across the small table. The coffee shop espresso machine hissed again. Someone laughed at the front. The world continued. He'll come, Weston said. I know, Lena said. What do you do now? Lena picked up the thumb drive and put it back on her keychain. She stood and buttoned her jacket. I go back to the hospital, she said. I check on my patient on the 4th floor, and I make sure that when Jason's documentation arrives, there's someone alive and present to receive it. Weston looked up at her. They know you're visible now. If Foss and Brandt are monitoring, then they're monitoring a first-year nurse at a mid-sized hospital, Lena said. Let them. She paused. The thing about being underestimated is that it only stops working when you let it. She walked out. It was 4:58 in the afternoon when she got back to Mercy General, and the first person she saw was Dr. Harold Voss, standing in the lobby with his coat on and his bag over his shoulder, clearly on his way out for the evening. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped when she saw him. They stood in the lobby for a moment, like two people who have been circling something all day and have just run out of room to avoid it. Cross, he said. Dr. Voss. He looked at her for a moment. He looked the way he had looked in his office the previous afternoon. Not angry, not authoritative, just a man trying to understand something that the tools of his profession were not quite equipped to process. The FBI agents left, he said. I know. Carl Brewer seemed relieved. He would be. Voss shifted his bag on his shoulder. Your patient on 4, Cross, the John Doe, he had a surgical consult at 1 o'clock. Resutured the lateral repair. He's stable. He paused. He asked about you. Again. I'll go up, she said. He nodded. He started to move past her, then he stopped, with his back half turned, and said without looking at her, the report I filed, the incident report from the night of the trauma. A pause. I amended it this morning. The decompression is documented as a supervised emergency procedure, with my oversight noted. He did not look at her. Just so you know. Lena stood very still. You didn't have to do that, she said. No, he agreed. I didn't. He walked out. She stood in the lobby for a moment after the doors closed behind him. Voss, with his 22 years and his grabbed wrist and his whiskey breath, had just put his name on something to protect hers. She did not know what to do with that, so she filed it in the part of her mind reserved for things she would process later, when the immediate situation was resolved and there was space to be a human being again, and she went to the elevator. Jason was awake. Not the half-trance wakefulness of the previous day, when the sedation was thin and his grip on coherence had been loose and effortful. He was fully, alertly awake, sitting up in the ICU bed with his color improved and his eyes clear. And when Lena came through the door, he looked at her with an expression that contained several things at once: relief, tension, and the focused urgency of someone who has been waiting with news. Close the door, he said. She closed it. Margaret was not at the unit entrance. She had, perhaps deliberately, found somewhere else to be. My contact came through, Jason said. He kept his voice low and even. Earlier than I expected. There's a package, physical documents, originals, not copies. Communications from inside the Carver operation, including a recorded transcript from the pre-mission briefing that was altered before it went into the official record. He looked at her directly. It proves the amendment was made before the mission launched, not after. They backdated the paperwork, Lena. They changed the timeline and then altered the records to make it look like a field decision. The room was very quiet. A field decision would have been Marcus's call, she said. Yes, which means he would have had to carry the responsibility for the change in the record. A dead man carries it cleanly, Jason said. The words were flat and hard, and she could see the cost of saying them on his face. No appeal, no investigation, no contradicting testimony. Lena sat down in the chair beside his bed. She had been standing through most of the past 3 days, and her body was reminding her of that now, with a specific insistence of physical fatigue that emotional adrenaline has been overriding for too long. Where is the package? She said. A woman named Petra Vance. She was an intelligence analyst embedded with the operational unit. She kept her own records independently. She said she always felt the operation had vulnerabilities, and she wanted documentation in case something went wrong. He paused. She's been sitting on this for 3 years because she didn't have anyone she trusted enough to hand it to. What changed? You showed up in a trauma bay, he said quietly. Word travels in very specific circles, Lena. When Petra heard that a woman had brought back a classified operator from 20 bullet wounds in a civilian hospital using techniques that are not in any nursing school curriculum, she knew. She reached out to my contact within 12 hours. Lena looked at the floor for a moment, then back at him. Where is Vance now? She's agreed to come in. She'll meet with a federal agent of our choosing, with physical documentation in hand, but she will not go anywhere near the established federal chain of command until she knows who she's dealing with. He looked at her. She needs a name she can trust. Rourke, Lena said. You trust him? Weston does. And Weston is good enough that her judgment stands. She paused. He'll need to come in through a channel that bypasses Brandt's office entirely. Weston is working on that. Jason nodded. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw was less tight than it had been in the chapel, and some of the desperate urgency of the morning had settled into something more resolved. The particular quality of a person who has moved from reaction into intention. There's one more thing, he said. She looked at him. Foss, he said. Garrett Foss at DIA. He's been monitoring your location since you started at this hospital. Not just since the incident, since before that. His voice was careful and even. He knew where you were, Lena. The non-approach protocol wasn't put there to protect you from being found. It was put there to protect him from the investigation that would have started if any federal agent made contact with you and you started talking. She felt something cold move through her that was not quite fear and was not quite anger, but lived in the space between them. "He's been watching me," she said, "for at least 8 months, possibly longer." She thought about the unknown number that had called her phone. The first time, the night of the incident, when she had silenced it. The second time, when she had answered and heard Silk's voice. She thought about those calls and what they might mean, and felt the geometry of the situation shift under her again. "If he's been monitoring me," she said slowly, "then he knows I met with Silk last night." "Yes. And he knows Silk told me about the authorization." "Probably, which means he knows that Silk is no longer fully contained. She was running it fast now, the way she used to run it. Which means Silk is now a liability to him, not an asset. And a liability that has just demonstrated willingness to share information." She stopped. Jason's expression confirmed it before he said it. "I had my contact check on Silk 2 hours ago." A pause. "He's not at his office. He's not at his residence. His aide says he took a personal call at noon and left the building, and nobody has seen him since." Lena stood up. "Lena, I have to make a call." She was already at the door. "Don't leave this room." "I'm re-sutured. I think I'll—" "Jason." She turned and looked at him with the full weight of everything she was carrying in her eyes. And whatever he saw in that look, it stopped him completely. "Please, stay in this room." He stayed. She moved into the hallway, fast, and found a quiet alcove near the unit entrance and stood there running the new calculation at full speed. All the pieces moving at once. Foss monitoring her location. Silk missing. The physical documents in Petra Vance's hands. Weston's notebook. Rourke on a prepaid phone. And somewhere above all of it, the specific truth that Foss now knew his position was being closed in on from multiple directions. Cornered people did not become less dangerous. They became more dangerous. They became the kind of dangerous that did not calculate consequences. She needed Weston. She needed her now, not in 2 hours. She went to the nurse's station and asked the overnight orderly, a young man named Theo who liked her because she had once explained a medical procedure to him without condescension, if she could borrow his personal cell phone for 5 minutes. He handed it over without question. She dialed the number Weston had called Rourke from. It rang twice. "It's me," Lena said. "Silk is missing. Foss knows. Whatever timeline you and Rourke were working with, cut it in half." Weston's voice was tight and immediate. "Where are you?" "Hospital, 4th floor. Does Cross have the documentation yet?" "Contact confirmed. Documents exist. Handoff pending. The analyst needs a clean channel to Rourke. Can he set it up in the next hour?" A brief silence. The sound of movement on Weston's end. "He's with me. Hold on." A muffled exchange. Then Rourke's voice came through, low and focused. All the compliance and hesitation of the previous day burned completely away. "Tell Cross's contact to meet us at the federal courthouse on Strand. Not the field office, the courthouse, the civil clerk's entrance, at 8 tonight. I'll have 2 people there I trust completely who are outside Brandt's reporting chain." His voice was firm. "Can you get Cross to confirm?" "Yes," Lena said. "And Cross, the patient, is he mobile?" She thought about Jason in the chapel that morning, pale and bleeding and fully determined, covering 20 feet of tile on pure will. "Enough," she said. "Then both of you need to be somewhere other than that hospital by 9 tonight," Rourke said. "If Foss is moving, he won't waste time." She ended the call. She handed the phone back to Theo. He looked at her face and started to ask if she was okay, and she said, "Fine, thank you, Theo," in the voice that meant everything was handled, and she walked back down the hall. She went back into Jason's room. He read her face before she said a word. "How bad?" he said. "Moving fast." She stood at the foot of his bed. I need you to contact Petra Vance. Tell her 8 o'clock, Federal Courthouse on Strand, Civil Clerk's entrance. Rourke will be there with 2 clean agents. He was already reaching for his phone, the borrowed one, which she noticed he had not given back. Done. He made the call. It was brief. He ended it and looked at her. She'll be there. Good. Lena stood there for a moment. She was looking at the man in the hospital bed, resutured, pale, 2 drainage tubes, 4 days from 20 bullet wounds. And she was weighing something that she had been weighing since the chapel, maybe since the trauma bay, maybe since the moment she had looked across an ICU room and seen a face with Marcus's eyes looking back at her. I need to tell you something, she said. He waited. That night in the trauma bay, when I went in, she paused. I knew. Not at first, but somewhere in the second hour, I knew it was you. I recognized your build, your hands, the scar on your left shoulder that you got in 2018. Her voice was steady and very quiet. And I want you to know that it didn't change what I did. I would have done it for any patient. But it was you, and I knew, and I want to be honest about that. Jason Cross looked at her for a long moment, and his face did something complicated and real, and not at all tactical. His voice, when he spoke, was rough at the edges. Marcus used to say you were the most honest person he knew, he said, even when the honesty was inconvenient. She didn't say anything. He was right, Jason said. Lena looked at the monitor, tracking his heartbeat in green lines across the screen. Steady, strong, given everything. She looked at it for a moment with the particular attention of someone who has stood in a room and fought for that beat with their bare hands and their borrowed needle and their body's oldest, most stubborn knowledge. Rest until 7, she said, then we move. She turned and walked out, and behind her, Jason Cross lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in 3 years, something that was not grief and was not mission and was not the specific hollow endurance of surviving something you weren't sure you deserved to survive. He felt like something was beginning. Down the hall, Donna Briggs was coming off her shift, coat on, bag over her shoulder, and she passed Lena in the corridor, and they looked at each other in the way that 2 people look at each other when they have been through something together that neither of them has named. Donna stopped walking. Whatever is happening, Donna said, and I am very specifically not asking what is happening. Are you all right? Lena looked at her. The real question beneath the question was whether she was in danger, and whether the hospital was in danger, and whether the past 3 days were going to resolve themselves into something survivable or into the kind of ending that nobody in a medical facility wanted to be anywhere near. She gave Donna the honest answer. Not yet, she said, but I'm working on it. Donna looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then she said, Bed 7 has a new admit, chest pain, probably anxiety, but check the EKG yourself. Don't trust the resident's read. She buttoned the top button of her coat. I'll see you tomorrow, Lena. She walked out. Lena watched her go. Then she went to check the EKG. The EKG was fine. Anxiety, just as Donna had predicted, in a 38-year-old accountant named Howard, who had convinced himself over 3 cups of coffee and a difficult phone call with his ex-wife that he was dying. Lena sat with him for 7 minutes, which was 4 more than protocol required, and explained what his heart was doing and what it was not doing, and watched the tension leave his face in stages, the way tension always leaves when someone finally understands that the thing they feared is not the thing that is happening. You're going to be okay, Howard, she said. You're sure? Your heart is fine. Your life is stressful. Those are 2 different problems. He almost laughed. Almost. She left him with a pamphlet and a referral note and went back to the corridor. And it was 6:43 in the evening, and she had 77 minutes before she needed to move Jason Cross out of a hospital bed and across the city to a federal courthouse. And the only thing between now and then was the ordinary work of a nurse finishing her shift in a place where people came to be repaired. She did the work. She checked her charts. She initialed the medication logs. She answered a question from a first-year resident who was uncertain about a potassium level and needed someone to confirm his instinct, which was correct. She did all of it with the full, present attention she always brought to it, because the work was real, and the patients were real, and the 77 minutes were not yet up. At 7:12, her borrowed calm cracked for the first time. She was at the nurse's station when Pete came in from the ambulance bay entrance, moving faster than his usual pace, and his face had the particular compressed urgency of someone carrying news they don't want to deliver. "There's a man outside," he said low. "He's been standing across the street for about 40 minutes. Theo noticed him on his smoke break. He's not a patient. He's not a visitor. He hasn't moved. He's not on a phone. He's just standing there watching the entrance." Pete paused. "Theo said he looks federal." Lena set down her pen. "Which entrance?" "Main. South side." Pete hesitated. "Should I call security?" "No," she said. "Don't call anyone. Go back to your patients." She looked at him steadily until the steadiness transferred. "It's fine, Pete." He went. She did not think it was fine. She thought it was Foss making his presence known, not moving yet, but present. A reminder, a pressure. The specific behavior of a man who wants the person he is watching to know they are being watched, because visibility is its own form of control. She went to the 4th floor. Jason was dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed when she came through the door, and Margaret was standing beside him with the expression of a woman who has had this argument once today and is not interested in having it again. "He says he's leaving," Margaret said. "He is," Lena said. She looked at Jason. "Not the main entrance. Side stairwell, ground floor, through the supply dock." "Foss?" he said. "Someone. Main entrance, south side, stationary for 40 minutes. He stood without hesitation. His color was better than the morning, but not good, and the careful way he held his left side told her the resuture was pulling. But his eyes were fully alert and his movement was controlled and deliberate. He knew how to manage pain. He had been managing it professionally for years. "Margaret," Lena said, and the charge nurse turned to her with an expression that was somewhere between exasperated professionalism and genuine personal concern. "If anyone asks, he signed a second refusal of care form at 6:45. You witnessed it." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "I did no such thing." "Margaret, I saw nothing at 6:45, Margaret said, very crisply, in the tone of a woman making an administrative decision. She will deal with the paperwork consequences of tomorrow. "I was doing medication rounds." She turned and walked out of the room without looking back. Lena looked at Jason. "Can you do stairs?" "Watch me," he said. She watched him. He did the stairs. The supply dock exit put them out on the west side of the building, 1 block from the parking structure. Lena did not go to her car. She went to the street and flagged a cab, and they got in, and she gave the driver an address 2 blocks from the federal courthouse on Strand. And then she sat back and looked at the window and did not speak. And Jason sat beside her and also did not speak. And the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who have spent enough time in operational contexts to know that conversation in a moving vehicle you did not choose is a liability. The driver, a man with a sports radio station running at low volume, seemed not to notice or care about his passengers. He drove. Lena watched the city go by. She was running the timeline. Weston and Rourke at the courthouse. Petra Vance with her physical documentation, a chain of custody that existed entirely outside of Brandt's office, and Foss's monitoring reach. If Vance's documents were what Jason said they were, originals, not copies, with the altered briefing transcript, then they had something that no amount of federal file flagging could erase or transfer. Something that existed in the physical world on paper that people had touched with their hands. Her phone, her actual phone, which she had retrieved from her locker before leaving, buzzed. Unknown number. She looked at it. Jason looked at her, looking at it. "Answer it," he said quietly. She answered, "Ms. Cross." The voice was male, measured, and entirely without the courtesy of introduction, which was itself an introduction. "My name is Garrett Foss. I think it's time we spoke directly." The cab moved through an intersection. The sports radio murmured. Jason's eyes were on her face. "All right," she said. "You've had an eventful few days," Foss said. "I want you to know that I bear you no ill will. None at all. What happened in that trauma bay, what you did for Lieutenant Cross, was remarkable. It speaks to your training and your character." A pause, perfectly weighted. "But I think you understand that the conversation you are attempting to have with certain parties tonight is one that is going to create very significant complications for a great many people." "Tell me which people," she said. "People who made difficult decisions in difficult circumstances," he said. "Decisions that, taken in isolation and outside of their operational context, can be made to look like something they were not." His voice was smooth and careful. "Your husband was a fine officer. His death was a tragedy. But the record of that mission, however imperfect, reflects the reality of what was operationally possible in those 18 hours. There was no malice. There was no conspiracy. There was a decision made under pressure, with incomplete information, by people who were doing their best." Lena listened to him deliver this version of events in his measured, reasonable voice, and she felt something very cold settle into the center of her chest. Not rage, not grief, something colder and more precise than either. "Marcus was not notified of the extraction change," she said. "He walked into that building on the original timeline. The amendment was backdated to look like a field decision made by his team. That is in the documents." Her voice was completely even. "That is not a decision made under pressure. That is a falsified record designed to protect the people who made the wrong call. And you know that, Mr. Foss. You have known it for 3 years." Silence. Then, "Be very careful, Ms. Cross." "I have been careful," she said. "For 3 years I have been careful. I am done being careful." She ended the call. Jason was looking at her. "Foss," he said. It was not a question. "He knows we're moving." She looked out the window at the passing street. "Driver, can you go a different route? Around on 5th? The driver shrugged and turned. She watched the mirrors. Nothing obvious. But obvious was not how people like Foss operated. "He called you directly," Jason said. "That means he's panicking. Or he's trying to slow us down while someone else moves." She looked at him. "How long has Petra Vance been traveling?" He checked his phone, sent a text, waited. The response came in 30 seconds. "She's 2 blocks from the courthouse," he said. "She's been there for 20 minutes. Lena exhaled. "Rourke?" Another text. Another wait. Weston confirmed they're inside. Civil clerk's entrance, east side. 2 additional agents, both clean. She let herself take one full breath, just one. Then she was back in the geometry of it, turning the pieces, looking for the angle she had missed. Because there was always an angle she had missed, and the cost of finding it late was too high. The cab stopped at the address she'd given. She paid and they got out, and the night air hit her, and she assessed the street in 3 seconds the way she always did. Exits, sightlines, movement, anomalies. One car parked 2 blocks north that had been there when they got in the cab because she had noted it then and was now potentially following. Or coincidence. She kept it in the peripheral of her awareness and filed it. "Walk normally," she said to Jason. "I'm walking with a resutured surgical repair and 2 drainage tubes," he said. "This is as normal as it gets." She almost said something. She didn't. They moved. The civil clerk's entrance to the federal courthouse was on the east side, modest and low traffic, a door that looked like it led to filing offices and administrative back rooms rather than anything significant. Rourke was inside, and beside him was Weston with her paper notebook and her tablet and the expression of a woman who has been waiting with controlled impatience for exactly as long as she said she would. Beside them was a woman Lena had never met in person, but recognized immediately from the operational file she had read 11 years ago as an embedded analyst. Petra Vance was in her mid-40s, slight, with careful eyes and hands that were pressing a manila envelope against her chest with the grip of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and is not yet sure it is safe to put it down. She looked at Lena, and something crossed her face that was recognition of a different kind. Not personal familiarity, but the specific recognition of one person seeing another who has been through the same fire from a different angle. "You're Walters," Petra said. "I was," Lena said. Petra looked at her for a moment. Then she held out the envelope. "He deserved better," she said. "Marcus Cross deserved better than what they gave him. I want you to know I know that." Lena took the envelope. Her hands were steady. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it with everything she had. And Petra seemed to understand that, because she gave a small nod and stepped back. Rourke stepped forward. He looked at Lena with 19 years of field experience, and whatever recalibration the past 24 hours had required, and he said, "I owe you an apology." "You followed your orders," she said. "I followed orders that were designed to protect guilty people," he said. "That's not something I get to feel neutral about." He paused. "I'm sorry." She handed him the envelope. He took it with both hands, carefully, the way you take something that has weight beyond its physical dimensions. "There's a secondary set of files," she said, and she unclipped the keychain fob from her jacket and handed it to Weston. 17 documents from the Carver Operational Archive. They corroborate the physical documents. Chain of custody on the digital files is admissible. The access was logged at source. She did not explain how she had accessed them, and Weston, to her credit, did not ask. Weston took the drive. She looked at it in her hand and then at Lena. "This is everything we need," she said quietly. "Almost," Lena said. She looked at Rourke. "Silk. Warren Silk. He's been missing since noon." Rourke's expression tightened. "We've had a quiet flag on his location since Weston called me. He surfaced 2 hours ago. He's at a hotel in Fairfax. He called his aide." He paused. "We think Foss tried to reach him. We think Silk didn't answer." Another pause, more weighted than the last. "And 20 minutes ago, Silk's personal attorney sent a document package to 3 separate federal oversight offices simultaneously, independent of anything we're doing." His voice had something in it that was not quite surprise, but was adjacent to it. "It looks like he made his own decision." Lena was quiet for a moment. She thought about the diner on Calloway Street, the silver-haired man with his folded hands and his careful, insufficient honesty, the weight he said he had been carrying. People who are carrying something don't always put it down in the right direction, but sometimes they do. "Good," she said. The room shifted. An agent she didn't know, one of Rourke's 2 clean additions, came through a side door and said in a low voice that they had confirmed secure communications to the oversight office, and the package was received and logged. Weston was already opening her laptop. Rourke was on his prepaid phone. The machinery of accountability, slow and imperfect and real, was beginning to turn. Jason had been standing slightly behind her through all of this, close enough to act if anything went wrong, far enough to give her the space the moment required. She felt him shift and turned. He was pale. He was also still upright through sheer determination, and the set of his jaw told her he was going to stay that way through force of will for as long as necessary. But there were limits, and she was close to watching him reach them. "You need to sit down," she said. "I'm fine." "Jason." He sat down in a chair against the wall. He put his head back and closed his eyes for a moment, and she watched him breathe, measured and deliberate, the way he breathed when he was managing pain. And she felt something move through her that was not professional and was not tactical and was entirely hers. She sat down beside him. They were quiet for a moment, with the activity of the room moving around them. Weston's fingers on keys, Rourke's voice on the phone, the agent moving between the door and the desk, the ordinary controlled urgency of people doing a job that matters. He'd be glad, Jason said without opening his eyes. She didn't ask who. I know, she said. Not because of the documents or the case or any of it. He paused. Because of you. Because you're still here. Still doing this. He opened his eyes and looked at her. He was so worried about you. In the end, he said you carried things alone and you didn't let anyone help. And he was afraid that after... He stopped, steadied. He made me promise to find you. If something happened to him, he made me promise. Lena looked at her hands for a moment. It took you 3 years, she said. You're very hard to find, he said. And this time, it was unmistakably something that lived in the territory of a smile. She looked at him. The dark blue eyes, the exhausted, determined, entirely genuine face of a man who had been shot 20 times and had woken up in a hospital saying her name and had checked himself out against medical advice and bled in a chapel and made phone calls on borrowed phones and sat in an administrative corridor of a federal courthouse because he had made a promise to his brother 3 years ago, and he was not the kind of man who broke promises. You need a hospital, she said. I've had enough of hospitals for a while. You have 2 drainage tubes and a resutured lateral repair. I'm aware. Jason. Lena. He said her name the same way he always had, the way she had heard it said only a handful of times in her careful, quiet, rebuilt life. And each time it had carried the specific frequency of a world she had closed behind her. But it did not feel closed anymore. It felt like a door that had been standing open for 3 years, waiting for her to decide whether to walk back through it. She did not walk through it tonight. Tonight was not for that. But she did not turn away from it either. And that was the first time in 3 years that she had managed not to turn away. Rourke crossed the room and stood in front of them. He had his professional face on, composed, forward-moving, but underneath it she could see the thing that 19 years of this work occasionally did to a person who was genuinely honest. The specific relief of a case moving in the right direction after moving in the wrong one. Voss has been contacted by the Oversight Office, he said. His clearance has been suspended pending an emergency review. Same for Brandt. He paused. Her office has been locked down. She won't be transferring any more case files tonight. Silk's package? Lena asked. Covers 2 of the 4 signatories directly. Yours covers the other 2. He looked at the manila envelope, which was now open on the desk with Weston working through its contents. Petra's transcript is exactly what you said it was. Pre-mission briefing, original and altered versions, with timestamps that prove the amendment was made before launch and backdated. His voice was even, but not entirely neutral. It's enough. Lena nodded once. There will be a formal process, Rourke said. Grand jury, testimony. It will take months, possibly longer. It will be public eventually. Your identity, both of them, will be part of the record. He looked at her directly. You understand what that means. Lena Cross ends, she said. Yes. She considered this. Lena Cross, 43 days employed, quiet apartment, loyalty card fob on her keychain. Mr. Gerald in bed 4, the EKG she had read herself because Donna told her not to trust the resident. The steady hands and the low profile, and the carefully constructed ordinary life. She considered what it meant to lose all of it, and she found, to her own measured surprise, that what she felt was not grief. What happens to the cases she worked? She asked. The patients. If my license comes under review... Dr. Voss filed an amended report this morning, Rourke said. Supervised emergency procedure. His name, his oversight, the decompression is his on paper. He paused. That protects the patients in the hospital from any liability connected to you. She thought about Voss, his 22 years, his grabbed wrist and his whiskey breath, and the quiet decision he had made without being asked. She filed it again, in the same place, for later. "All right," she said. Rourke nodded. He went back to Weston. The room continued its work. Jason was watching her. "What do you do now?" he asked. It was the same question Weston had asked her in the coffee shop back room, and she had answered it then by saying she needed to get back to her patients. She could not say that now. Her patients were covered. The shift was over. Lena Cross's carefully maintained ordinary life was in the process of dissolving, and on the other side of that dissolution was a woman she had not been for 3 years. And the question of who that woman was now and what she was going to do with herself was one she did not yet have an answer to. But she had the beginning of one. She looked at Jason. "First, I'm going to make sure you get proper medical attention instead of whatever this is." She gestured at his general condition, which was objectively poor by any clinical measure. "And then I'm going to testify. Everything I know, everything I saw, everything Marcus told me in those final 18 hours before he walked into that building." Her voice did not break. It carried something heavier than breaking, a clear, held weight. The weight of someone who has been carrying a truth alone for 3 years and is finally, deliberately, putting it down in the right place. "And then I'm going to figure out what comes next." "Do you know what you want it to be?" he asked. She thought about that. She thought about Mr. Gerald gripping her hand with both of his, about Danny cheering at 3 in the morning, about the dosing error she had caught silently, and the EKG she had read herself, and the 7 minutes she had spent with an accountant named Howard, explaining the difference between a stressed heart and a broken one. She thought about 43 days of showing up and doing the work and caring about the outcome. And she thought about the fact that none of that had been a performance. None of it had been a cover. It had been real, every single moment of it, more real than most things in her life since the morning she had walked away from everything she used to be. "I want to go back to nursing," she said. It was a simple sentence, and it carried everything she meant it to carry. Jason looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Good." Rourke called across the room. "We need to get you both somewhere secure tonight. I have a location." "I need to make one stop first," Lena said. She crossed to where Weston was working and stood beside her, and waited until Weston looked up. She held out her hand. Weston looked at her palm, uncertain. "The notebook," Lena said. Weston handed it over. Lena flipped to a clean page at the back. She wrote quickly and clearly, a sequence of 7 names and dates and file references that existed nowhere in any database she had access today. Information that she had been carrying in her memory for 3 years with nowhere to put it. She had memorized it the way you memorize things when you know you may not have paper and may not have time. And she had been waiting without knowing she was waiting for the right moment to write it down. She handed the notebook back to Weston. Weston looked at the page and went very still. "That's the full chain," Lena said. "Everyone who touched the Carver authorization, in order, with dates, including 2 names that aren't on your list yet." She paused. "You're going to need them." Weston looked at her with the eyes of a woman who has been doing this job for 10 years and has just been handed the single most important piece of information she has ever held. She opened her mouth and then closed it again, which was an unusual response for her, and Lena took it as the highest form of compliment the situation permitted. "Go," Weston said finally. "Get somewhere safe. We'll handle this." Lena put on her jacket. Jason came to his feet with the slow, deliberate care of a man paying close attention to his own body's limits and choosing to respect them, which was a significant improvement over his behavior at the chapel. She stood beside him and did not offer her arm because he had not asked for it and would not, and she respected that because she understood it completely. They walked to the door together. "Cross." Rourke's voice stopped her at the threshold. She turned. He was looking at her from across the room, and there was something in his face that had nothing to do with the case, or the testimony, or the formal processes that were now in motion. Something personal, and direct. What you did in that trauma bay 4 days ago, the needle, the timing, all of it. I've read the report 3 times. He paused. That was extraordinary. She looked at him. He was alive, she said simply. I wanted to keep him that way. She walked out. The formal investigation into Operation Carver and the unauthorized amendment of its extraction timeline was opened the following morning by 2 separate oversight bodies operating in parallel, triggered simultaneously by Silk's package, Rourke's evidence, and a sealed complaint filed under a name that had not existed in any official record until 48 hours before. Lena Walters, operational medical specialist, 3 years separated, identity reconstructed, now returned. Garrett Foss was placed on administrative suspension within 36 hours. Carol Brandt's security clearance was revoked within 48. The full chain of authorization, all 7 names, in order, with dates, became the backbone of a grand jury subpoena that was filed in federal court on a Tuesday morning, quiet and official and entirely irresistible. The investigation took 11 months. Lena testified 4 times. She did it in the same voice she used for everything, clear, steady, precise, and entirely without performance. And the people in the room across from her, experienced professionals all, found themselves leaning forward in their chairs without meaning to. Dr. Harold Voss retained his amended report. No review was ever initiated against Mercy General's ER, and the 9 patients whose lives had been touched by the events of that first overnight shift recovered without complication and without ever knowing the full story of the rookie nurse who had been assigned to their beds. Jason Cross was readmitted to a military medical facility 6 days after the courthouse, had 2 additional surgical procedures, and was released to outpatient recovery 11 weeks later. He did not return to active duty. He did not go far. Warren Silk resigned his commission during the 2nd month of the investigation. He submitted a full written account to the Oversight Committee that ran to 63 pages. It was the most thorough document in the record. Rourke read it twice and said nothing out loud about it. Weston said what both of them were thinking. Better late than never is still better. On a Thursday in April, 11 months and 3 weeks after a man with 20 bullet wounds came through an ambulance bay in the middle of the night, Lena Cross walked back into Mercy General Hospital and clipped her badge to her chest. New badge, same name. Because the name had been hers all along. She had chosen it. She had lived in it. She had done real and honest work under it. And no investigation, no revelation, no returning ghost of her former life was going to take it from her. Donna Briggs was at the nurse's station. She looked up. She looked at the badge. She looked at Lena's face. She said nothing for a full 3 seconds. Then she said, "Bed 4 has a new admit. Elderly gentleman, possible arrhythmia, very anxious. He reminds me a little of Mr. Gerald." She handed Lena a clipboard and turned back to her work. Lena Cross, RN, took the clipboard, looked at the chart, and walked down the hall to bed 4. And the woman who went through that curtain was not hiding, and was not running, and was not sealed inside a name she had borrowed to survive. She was exactly who she had decided to be. Not despite everything she had survived, but because of it, built from it, every hard and honest piece of it, finally standing in the right place. She pulled back the curtain and said, "Hi there, I'm Lena. Tell me what's going on." And she meant it with everything she had.